Winter arrived early across England in 1888, laying a white silence over fields, forests, villages, and noble estates alike. Yet nowhere did the season seem brighter than Ravensheir Palace, where bells rang joyfully after the birth of Duke Adrian Ravenshire's long-awaited twin heirs. Crowds gathered beyond the iron gates, cheering as church towers echoed with celebration, convinced that fortune had finally smiled upon one of the kingdom's oldest families. Servants laughed openly, cooks prepared endless feasts, musicians filled marble halls with triumphant melodies, and grateful villagers prayed for the health of the newborn children they believed would inherit a future of peace. Inside the magnificent palace, however, happiness rested upon fragile foundations. Lady Clara Ravensheir lay pale beneath embroidered blankets, her strength nearly exhausted after bringing Oliver and Emma into the world. The physicians whispered that another hour of labor might have claimed her life. They ordered complete rest, forbidding her from leaving her bed for many weeks, fearing even a short walk could reopen hidden wounds. Despite fever, exhaustion, and constant pain, Clara thanked every servant who entered her chamber, remembered each nurse by name, and insisted extra broth be carried downstairs for the stable boys working through the bitter cold. Raised by a respected physician, Clara possessed remarkable knowledge of herbs and simple remedies. Before marriage she had spent countless evenings grinding dried flowers, preparing healing tinctures, and comforting frightened patients beside her father. Those gentle habits followed her into noble life. Whenever illness spread through nearby cottages, baskets of medicine quietly appeared at humble doorsteps without any announcement from the palace. Adrian often discovered only afterward that his wife had paid struggling families from her own allowance. He admired her compassion even when he believed she gave too generously. Adrian himself inspired very different emotions. At 36 he stood among England's wealthiest dukes and most respected military commanders, celebrated for impossible victories won through discipline rather than reckless courage. Soldiers trusted his judgment completely because he remained calm beneath overwhelming pressure. Enemies feared his unwavering resolve. Friends admired his honor. Yet the qualities that made him formidable upon battlefields also shaped his private life. Once convinced something was true, Adrian rarely questioned it again, especially when evidence appeared undeniable and trusted voices repeated the same conclusion. No one understood that weakness better than Lord Cedric Ashcombe. Adrian's 52-year-old uncle wore effortless charm before noble society, smiling graciously at banquets while speaking warmly about family loyalty. Behind closed doors his kindness disappeared like mist beneath sunlight. Years of quiet ambition had hardened into obsession. The birth of Oliver and Emma shattered his last hope of inheriting Ravenshire's immense fortune. Watching guests toast the infants, Cedric raised his crystal glass with perfect courtesy while secretly deciding their mother must fall before spring. His scheme unfolded patiently. Forged correspondence appeared describing secret meetings with foreign agents. Anonymous witnesses claimed Clara had accepted mysterious payments. A loyal palace clerk received generous bribes to alter official records. Each false document seemed small alone, but together they painted an alarming picture. Cedric never rushed events. Instead, he allowed suspicion to bloom naturally, knowing fear often accomplished what force never could. Then tragedy struck. Captain William Henshaw, an honorable officer investigating irregular military accounts, was discovered murdered beside an icy woodland road. His death shocked the kingdom. Before royal investigators completed their search, blood-stained papers vanished from the captain's satchel. Days later those same documents appeared hidden beneath Clara's bed, carefully wrapped inside embroidered linen no ordinary servant would question. The discovery spread through Ravensheir Palace like wildfire carried by winter wind. Adrian refused to believe the accusation. He personally searched every page, hoping to uncover obvious deception. Instead he found signatures resembling Clara's handwriting, coded messages referencing troop movements, and records suggesting confidential information had reached foreign enemies. The palace steward confirmed suspicious deliveries. 2 respected officers reluctantly testified they had seen unfamiliar riders leaving the estate after midnight. Even the frightened clerk repeated Cedric's carefully rehearsed lies. Every answer deepened Adrian's confusion until certainty began slipping through his hands. Clara listened in stunned silence as the accusations were read aloud. Though still too weak to stand without assistance, she met Adrian's eyes with quiet dignity. She denied every charge without anger or desperation, insisting someone had woven an elaborate deception around them both. She begged him to remember the woman he had married rather than the papers scattered across his desk. Adrian desperately wanted to believe her. His heart recognized the kindness that had transformed lonely halls into welcoming homes. His mind saw only evidence demanding justice. The council urged swift punishment. Some nobles demanded execution, claiming treason against the crown deserved no mercy regardless of rank. Adrian dismissed them all before dawn. Alone inside his study, he stared through frost-covered windows until sunrise painted the snow crimson. Love battled duty with relentless fury. Executing Clara would destroy him forever. Ignoring the accusations would dishonor every soldier who had trusted his command. Broken by impossible choices, he announced permanent exile instead. Snow drifted heavily across the palace courtyard when Clara emerged wrapped in a worn cloak, Oliver sleeping against one shoulder, Emma cradled beneath the other. Every step seemed painfully uncertain. Servants openly wept yet dared not interfere. Reaching the great gates, she slowly knelt despite her weakness and looked toward Adrian waiting silently upon his black horse. "I have never betrayed you," she whispered. "Please protect our children if nothing else." Adrian's fingers tightened around the reins until his gloves creaked. He could not force himself to meet her tear-filled gaze. Cedric quietly urged him onward. Without another word, Adrian turned his horse and disappeared into the swirling snowfall as the towering gates closed behind Clara. Hours later she reached a forgotten castle buried beneath drifting snow, its broken towers clawing at the gray sky. Hidden among distant pines, unseen mercenaries accepted heavy purses of gold from Cedric's messenger, smiled without conscience, and rode silently toward the abandoned fortress before dawn. The forgotten castle greeted Lady Clara Ravensheir with silence so complete that even the wind seemed reluctant to linger within its broken walls. Snow had drifted through shattered windows, covering cracked stone floors in a pale blanket that erased the last signs of life. The once proud fortress, abandoned for decades, stood like a lonely monument to forgotten promises. Its towers leaned beneath the weight of countless winters, sections of the roof had collapsed into empty chambers, and frost coated every surface with glittering crystals. Holding Oliver and Emma close beneath her cloak, Clara crossed the threshold knowing there would be no servants waiting beside warm fires, no physicians and no rescue. Only the echo of her footsteps answered her. She explored the castle before darkness settled completely. Every room revealed another hardship. The kitchens were stripped bare except for cracked pots and broken shelves. The wells had frozen solid. Mice darted between fallen beams, while crows nested inside the ruined chapel. At last she found one chamber where the fireplace remained intact despite years of neglect. Though smoke escaped through holes in the chimney, it offered the only hope against the deadly cold. She gathered splintered chairs, broken tables and rotting shelves, feeding them carefully into the flames until a weak warmth spread through the room. Wrapping both babies inside blankets torn from faded curtains, she whispered gentle lullabies while snow continued falling beyond the broken walls. The first nights tested every measure of her courage. Oliver cried from hunger while Emma shivered despite every layer Clara could find. Her own fever returned, leaving her dizzy whenever she stood. Yet each morning she forced herself outside before sunrise, melting clean snow over the fire for drinking water and searching the nearby woods for anything useful. Beneath frozen branches she discovered old rabbit snares left years before. In abandoned storerooms she found sacks containing a few handfuls of spoiled grain that could still be cleaned enough to make thin porridge. Nothing came easily, yet every tiny success reminded her that surrender would leave her children defenseless. Drawing upon everything her father had taught her, Clara searched the sheltered corners beside the castle walls where winter herbs sometimes survived beneath snow. She uncovered hardy rosemary, dried yarrow, and stubborn thyme clinging to life against warm stones touched by weak afternoon sunlight. Using broken window frames as protection from icy winds, she carefully planted every living root she found into small patches of soil inside the crumbling greenhouse attached to the castle. The work exhausted her fragile body, but tending those tiny green shoots gave her something precious beyond food. It reminded her that life often hid beneath the harshest seasons, waiting patiently for someone willing to believe it could bloom again. Days slowly blended into weeks. Clara measured time not by calendars but by the growing strength of the twins. Oliver's cries became louder. Emma's tiny fingers began reaching toward flickering firelight. Watching them smile for the first time inside the ruined chamber filled Clara with unexpected determination. She no longer saw herself as a banished Duchess. She became simply a mother protecting her children with whatever remained in her hands and heart. One moonless evening, the fragile peace shattered. Long mournful howls echoed through the valley, rising from the surrounding forest like voices carried upon the wind. Clara froze beside the fireplace as Oliver stirred uneasily. Another howl answered the first, then another, until the darkness outside trembled with the cries of an entire wolf pack driven desperate by hunger. Their shadows appeared beyond broken gates, moving silently across fresh snow with glowing eyes fixed upon the abandoned castle. The first crash came from the neglected stable. Rotten wooden doors splintered beneath powerful jaws. Horses had long since disappeared, leaving only empty stalls, but the wolves continued searching, their instincts sharpened by starvation. Emma began crying loudly, and the sound echoed through the empty halls. Clara understood instantly that silence had protected them until now. Fear had finally discovered their hiding place. She placed the twins inside an old stone bread oven near the fireplace, cushioning them with blankets while leaving enough space for air. Gripping a rusted fireplace poker in one hand and an oil lantern in the other, she stepped into the corridor alone. Her hands trembled, yet her feet never retreated. If the wolves reached the nursery chamber, they would find only her standing between them and the children she loved more than life itself. The largest wolf burst through the stable entrance, followed by several others slipping between fallen beams with terrifying speed. Their ribs showed beneath thick winter coats, and their breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Clara raised the lantern high, shouting with every ounce of strength remaining in her weakened body. Flames frightened the first animals only briefly. Hunger proved stronger than caution. The leader lowered its head, growled deeply, and began advancing across the icy stones. A thunderous gunshot shattered the night. The lead wolf collapsed instantly. Before the others recovered from surprise, two enormous hunting dogs charged through the open gate, barking with fearless fury. Another shot echoed across the valley, scattering the remaining wolves into darkness. Moments later, an elderly man emerged from the swirling snow carrying a long hunting rifle worn smooth by decades of use. His silver beard was dusted with frost, his heavy wool coat patched many times, yet his steady eyes revealed neither panic nor hesitation. "I feared the howls reached this place," he said quietly. "Looks like I arrived just in time." He introduced himself as Elias Rowan, a retired gamekeeper who lived alone several miles away in a stone cabin overlooking the valley. For years he had protected nearby forests from poachers and rescued travelers lost during winter storms. Though age had bent his shoulders slightly, courage still strengthened every movement. After ensuring the wolves had retreated, he repaired the broken stable doors as best he could before entering the castle. When he saw the sleeping twins safe beside the fire, something gentle softened his weathered face. From that night forward, Elias returned often. He taught Clara how to identify hidden springs that never completely froze, where rabbits nested beneath thick brambles, and how to stack firewood so it stayed dry beneath snow. He mended leaking roofs, reinforced weakened doors, and crafted sturdy cradles from fallen oak branches. Never once did he ask why she had been abandoned. He judged her only by what he witnessed, a young mother refusing to surrender despite impossible odds. Word slowly spread among scattered cottages that the forgotten castle sheltered kindness instead of ghosts. The first visitor was a widow carrying everything she owned inside a single basket. Soon afterward came 3 orphan brothers whose parents had died from fever, an elderly blacksmith with crippled hands, and a deaf little girl left alone after losing her family during the winter epidemic. Clara welcomed every soul without question, sharing whatever food remained equally among them all. The abandoned fortress gradually filled with quiet conversations, shared labor, children's laughter, and the comforting sound of hammers repairing broken walls. For the first time in decades, smoke rose steadily from every chimney. Far beyond the valley, however, Lord Cedric Ashcombe listened with growing disbelief as frightened informants described the impossible transformation. The woman he had condemned to freeze had instead become the heart of a thriving refuge. Travelers now spoke of the forgotten castle with admiration rather than pity, and desperate families were beginning to journey there seeking hope. Rage replaced his confidence. Summoning a band of hardened mercenaries into his private chamber, Cedric scattered heavy purses of gold across the table and spoke with chilling calm. "Burn the sanctuary," he ordered. "Leave no witness alive. This time, the Duchess and her children must vanish before anyone discovers what she has become." By the time winter reached its cruelest depths, the forgotten castle no longer resembled a place waiting to die. Smoke curled steadily from repaired chimneys, children chased one another through cleared courtyards, and patches of green herbs survived beneath carefully crafted glass frames despite the relentless frost. The people who had once arrived broken by hunger and grief now worked side by side. The old blacksmith repaired tools instead of mourning his lost trade. The widow baked coarse bread for every family. The orphan brothers gathered firewood before dawn, while the deaf little girl learned to smile with her hands as Clara patiently taught everyone simple gestures she could understand. Hope had quietly taken root where despair had once ruled. Yet peace often attracts those who fear it most. Far away, Lord Cedric Ashcombe received increasingly troubling reports. Every messenger carried the same unbelievable story. Instead of freezing to death, Lady Clara had transformed an abandoned fortress into a sanctuary. Travelers were changing their routes simply to spend a night within its welcoming walls. Hungry families spoke her name with gratitude. Villagers called her the Lady of the Open Fire. Cedric understood something terrifying. If Adrian ever learned what his wife had accomplished, questions would replace certainty, and questions would unravel every lie he had woven. He decided that no witness could remain alive. The mercenaries arrived before dawn, hidden beneath heavy cloaks that blended into the swirling snow. They surrounded the valley with practiced silence before splitting into smaller groups. One band crept toward the barns. Another scattered poison grain among the chickens. Others carried flaming arrows wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. They had not come to conquer the castle. They had come to erase it. The first arrow struck the roof of a storage shed just as the eastern sky began turning pale. Flames climbed the dry timbers with frightening speed. Moments later another arrow shattered a stable window, filling the crisp morning air with sparks and smoke. Frightened horses screamed as villagers rushed from their beds, clutching buckets and blankets instead of weapons. Clara emerged carrying Oliver against one shoulder while Emma slept peacefully inside a sling across her chest. The bitter wind whipped snow across her face, but her voice remained calm as she directed frightened families toward the safest exit through the rear gate. Mothers gathered children. The blacksmith lifted elderly neighbors into wagons. Elias Rowan quickly recognized the attack for what it truly was. "They're driving us into the forest," he warned quietly. "The fire is only the beginning." He ordered everyone to leave immediately. Possessions no longer mattered. Survival did. The villagers formed a desperate line moving toward the snow-covered woods beyond the valley. Clara refused to ride despite her lingering weakness. She walked beside every frightened child, encouraging them with gentle words while carrying both infants through deep drifts. Smoke rose behind them, dark against the white landscape, until the castle slowly disappeared beneath a curtain of ash and falling snow. Hours passed before they dared stop. The forest surrounding the valley seemed endless, its towering pines bending beneath thick layers of ice. Snow muffled every footstep, creating an eerie silence broken only by the distant cries of ravens circling overhead. The cold deepened as daylight faded behind heavy clouds. Several children began shivering uncontrollably. The widow stumbled from exhaustion. Even Elias, whose strength had carried countless travelers through harsh winters, understood they would not reach another village before nightfall. He led them toward a narrow clearing sheltered by enormous ancient oaks, where fallen trunks offered protection from the wind. Small fires were carefully built beneath overhanging branches, their smoke hidden by the gathering storm. Clara wrapped the twins inside fresh blankets while checking each child for frostbite. Though her own fingers had grown numb, she gently rubbed warmth back into tiny hands and cheeks before treating herself. Her first instinct remained everyone else's safety. Oliver slept peacefully. Emma smiled faintly in her dreams. Watching them, Clara allowed herself one quiet breath of relief. It lasted only a heartbeat. A deep growl rolled through the forest. Every conversation stopped instantly. Another growl answered from somewhere beyond the trees, heavier than any wolf's voice. Snow drifted from branches as something enormous moved through the undergrowth. Birds burst upward in frightened flocks before vanishing into the gray sky. Elias slowly raised one weathered hand. "Nobody runs," he whispered. The creature emerged between the pines. It was a massive brown bear, its winter coat ragged from starvation, its broad shoulders towering above the surrounding brush. Hunger had hollowed its sides, making its dark eyes burn with dangerous desperation. The smell of food, smoke, and frightened people had drawn it from its den weeks too early. The children froze. The horses panicked. One frightened mare jerked violently against its reins, nearly overturning the sled carrying the twins. The bear noticed. With terrifying speed, it lowered its head and charged directly toward Oliver and Emma. Everything happened at once. The widow screamed. The orphan boys grabbed burning branches. The blacksmith reached for his hammer. Elias shouldered his old hunting rifle. Clara never hesitated. She threw herself across the sled, wrapping both babies beneath her cloak while shielding them with her own body. She knew she could not stop the charging beast. She knew she would almost certainly die. Yet no instinct proved stronger than a mother's determination to stand between danger and her children. Elias fired. The rifle thundered across the valley. The bullet struck the bear's shoulder, but the enormous animal barely faltered. Roaring with pain instead of fear, it continued charging through the snow, closing the distance with frightening speed. Elias struggled to reload. His aged hands, steady in ordinary moments, suddenly felt painfully slow. The bear was only yards away. Then another sound shattered the forest. Powerful hooves thundered across frozen ground. From between the towering pines burst a magnificent black stallion, its long mane flying wildly through the storm. Age had done little to diminish its strength. It charged directly across the bear's path, rearing high enough to fill the clearing with a deafening cry. For one crucial heartbeat, the bear turned. The distraction was enough. Elias rammed another cartridge into his rifle and fired a second shot. This time the bullet struck true. Wounded and startled by the furious stallion, the great beast stumbled backward before retreating into the dense forest, disappearing beneath the swirling snow as suddenly as it had appeared. Silence returned. Only the crackling fires and the frightened breathing of exhausted families remained. Clara slowly lifted her head. Oliver and Emma were unharmed. Tears streamed silently down her face as she held them tighter than ever before. Elias lowered his rifle and stared toward the distant trees where the black horse still stood watching them. Recognition softened his weathered features. "I know that horse," he murmured. "Years ago, the Duke released his finest war companion after the campaigns ended. Seems loyalty survives even when men forget." The stallion vanished into the forest without another sound. That night, as the blizzard raged outside their temporary shelter, Adrian Ravensheir sat alone inside his silent palace, unable to sleep. Every memory of Clara returned with painful clarity, the way she had stayed awake beside feverish servants, rescued injured birds with patient hands, and shared bread with strangers before feeding herself. None of it resembled the portrait of treachery painted by the evidence. His doubts finally outweighed his certainty. Before sunrise he summoned the elderly palace physician, whose trembling conscience could bear its burden no longer. With tears filling his tired eyes, the old man confessed that every document had been forged, every witness bribed, and every accusation carefully orchestrated by Lord Cedric Ashcombe. Adrian's world shattered in a single breath. As he staggered from the chamber, realizing he had condemned the innocent woman he loved, a frightened messenger burst through the palace doors carrying news that armed riders had already been seen racing toward the valley where the abandoned castle stood. Adrian Ravensheir rode through the storm without stopping, his black stallion cutting across frozen fields with desperate determination. Snow lashed against his face until it stung like shattered glass, but he barely noticed. Every mile carried him deeper into a truth he wished he had discovered months earlier. The physician's confession echoed endlessly through his thoughts. Clara had never betrayed him. She had been betrayed because of him. The memory of her kneeling in the snow with Oliver and Emma wrapped against her trembling body haunted every heartbeat. For the first time since commanding soldiers across blood-soaked battlefields, Adrian feared he had already arrived too late. Behind him rode a company of royal guards sworn to the crown rather than to any noble house. They carried sealed warrants bearing the king's authority to arrest Lord Cedric Ashcombe for murder, treason, and conspiracy. Yet legal documents meant little if the innocent family they sought to protect no longer lived. Adrian urged his horse faster, praying the storm had slowed Cedric's mercenaries as much as it slowed him. Far ahead, the valley surrounding the abandoned castle had become a battlefield. The villagers returned from the forest expecting to rebuild what fire had damaged. Instead they found armed riders waiting among the drifting snow. Cedric's mercenaries had used the villagers' absence to destroy nearly everything they had created. Fields carefully planted beneath winter frames burned beneath sheets of orange flame. The rebuilt barns collapsed into smoking ruins. The fresh well Elias had uncovered only weeks earlier had been poisoned with black powder that turned the water bitter and foul. Every act of destruction had been deliberate. They had not attacked out of anger. They had attacked hope itself. Clara refused to surrender the sanctuary without resistance. She gathered every able villager within the damaged courtyard. None possessed swords worthy of trained soldiers. The old blacksmith carried only a heavy forging hammer. Farmers gripped pitchforks, woodcutters raised axes, and older children gathered stones inside baskets. Elias calmly distributed hunting bows hidden beneath loose floorboards months earlier, placing one weathered bow into the hands of each villager steady enough to draw it. "This castle was abandoned once," he said quietly. We brought it back to life together. If it falls today, it will not be because we abandoned one another." His words spread courage faster than fear. The mercenaries charged through the shattered gates just after noon. Arrows darkened the pale sky. Axes struck repaired doors. Smoke rolled across the courtyard until the air tasted of ash. The clash became a desperate struggle where every person fought not for wealth or glory but for the fragile home they had built together. Farmers defended children beside retired craftsmen. Widows carried water to extinguish spreading flames while orphan boys pulled frightened animals toward safety. Clara moved tirelessly among them despite lingering weakness from childbirth, treating wounds with strips of linen and herbs gathered from the greenhouse she had refused to abandon. Then disaster struck. A mercenary captain noticed Oliver sleeping inside a wooden cradle beside the great hall. Seeing opportunity where others saw only an infant, he snatched the boy into his arms before mounting his horse. Clara heard Oliver's terrified cries and turned just in time to watch the rider galloping toward the northern gate. "No!" Her scream echoed across the valley. Without thinking, she ran after the horse through deep snow, ignoring arrows striking the frozen ground around her. Elias tried to follow, but 3 mercenaries blocked his path. The old gamekeeper fought fiercely with the butt of his rifle, yet precious seconds slipped away. During the confusion, another frightened horse broke free from its burning stable. Emma's cradle, resting upon a small supply wagon, lurched violently as the panicked animal bolted toward the frozen river winding below the castle cliffs. The wagon struck a hidden stone, overturning completely. Emma's cradle slid across the ice like a tiny wooden boat drifting toward danger. Nobody saw it. Everyone's eyes followed Oliver. Everyone except a magnificent golden eagle circling high above the valley. The great bird released a piercing cry unlike any ordinary hunting call. Again and again it swooped low above the frozen river, refusing to leave. Elias looked upward instinctively. Following the eagle's desperate flight, he finally saw the cradle sliding steadily toward a widening patch of thin ice where dark water churned beneath the surface. He dropped his rifle immediately. There. Snatching a coil of rope from the blacksmith, Elias tied one end around his waist while several villagers secured the other. Without hesitation he sprinted onto the cracking river. Every step produced sharp splintering sounds beneath his boots. The cradle drifted farther away with each passing moment. The eagle circled lower, its broad wings casting fleeting shadows across the snow as though guiding his path. Elias reached the cradle just as the ice beneath it groaned ominously. He grabbed the wooden handle. The frozen surface exploded. Frigid water swallowed his legs, dragging him downward with terrifying force. Villagers strained desperately against the rope while Elias clung to Emma's cradle with one hand and the icy edge with the other. The blacksmith planted his boots firmly and pulled with every ounce of remaining strength. Inch by inch they dragged both man and child back across the splintering ice until solid ground welcomed them once more. Emma never stopped sleeping. Wrapped safely beneath thick blankets, she remained blissfully unaware of how narrowly death had passed her by. Relief lasted only moments. Oliver was still gone. Clara collapsed to her knees as the mercenary carrying her son disappeared into the snow-covered hills. Every instinct urged her to continue chasing him, but exhaustion finally overcame determination. Tears blurred her vision while smoke drifted across the ruined courtyard. Then the thunder of galloping horses rolled through the valley. Adrian arrived. He did not ride at the front of a proud procession. He charged alone far ahead of his guards, sword already drawn, his face marked by grief rather than triumph. The moment he saw Clara alive, relief swept across him so powerfully that words failed. Yet there was no time for apologies. Oliver's cries echoed faintly through the northern pass. Adrian wheeled his horse immediately and pursued the fleeing mercenary. The chase carried them across narrow ridges coated with ice. When the outlaw realized escape had become impossible, he abandoned his horse and fled into the burning remains of an old watchtower overlooking the valley. Adrian followed without hesitation. Inside the collapsing structure waited Lord Cedric Ashcombe. The old noble calmly held Oliver while flames climbed the timber walls around him. "You finally learned the truth," Cedric said with a smile devoid of remorse. "Far too late." He confessed everything with chilling pride. He had forged Clara's letters, bribed witnesses, murdered Captain Henshaw, poisoned military accounts, and planted false evidence beneath her bed. He admitted manipulating Adrian's sense of honor because he understood that an honorable man often became easiest to deceive. Every word echoed beyond the burning doorway where royal guards and terrified villagers had gathered after arriving behind Adrian. Cedric realized too late that his own arrogance had become the strongest evidence against him. Desperate, he shoved Oliver toward a frightened servant and attacked Adrian with drawn sword. Steel clashed beneath collapsing beams. Neither man fought for wealth. One battled to protect stolen ambition. The other fought to reclaim the family he had nearly destroyed. Cedric struck with furious desperation, but years of bitterness could not overcome Adrian's disciplined skill. One decisive movement sent Cedric's weapon skidding across the burning floor. Royal guards rushed forward, forcing the defeated conspirator into heavy irons as the watchtower groaned around them. Adrian immediately gathered Oliver into trembling arms before carrying him back outside. When Clara saw her son alive, she broke into tears she had held back for months. Adrian stopped several steps away, unable to cross the remaining distance. Smoke drifted silently between them while snow began falling once more, covering ruined fields and broken stones alike. He lowered his head, unable to ask forgiveness he believed he no longer deserved. Clara held both twins close without speaking. Around them, grateful villagers slowly extinguished the final flames, but inside Adrian's heart another fire continued burning. Though Cedric's lies had finally been defeated, he feared the deepest wound of all had only just begun, because winning back a kingdom had always been easier than earning back the trust of the woman he had abandoned. Spring arrived so quietly that many villagers noticed it first in the sound of dripping icicles rather than the sight of blooming flowers. Snow withdrew from the valley inch by inch, revealing green grass where ashes had once settled after the terrible attack. The abandoned castle, scarred by fire and countless winters, stood stronger than before because every repaired stone had been lifted by hands that refused to surrender. New wooden beams supported the great hall, fresh windows welcomed warm sunlight into rooms that had once echoed with emptiness, and vines began climbing the ancient walls as though nature itself wished to heal every wound left behind. Life returned with remarkable determination. The widow baked bread before dawn, filling the corridors with comforting warmth. The old blacksmith reopened his forge, fashioning horseshoes, hinges, and farming tools instead of weapons. The orphan brothers planted rows of vegetables across fields that mercenaries had tried to destroy. The deaf little girl raced laughing through the courtyard with children who had learned to speak using the signs Clara patiently taught them. Every corner of the castle reflected shared labor rather than noble wealth. Lady Clara Ravensheir became the quiet heart of that growing community. Her herbal gardens spread across the southern walls, overflowing with lavender, rosemary, chamomile, and healing flowers that attracted bees and butterflies. Sick travelers arrived from distant villages seeking her remedies, yet no one was ever asked for payment. She believed kindness multiplied only when freely given. Though the months had restored much of her physical strength, the deeper wounds within her heart remained carefully guarded. She spoke politely whenever Adrian approached, but the effortless trust they had once shared had not yet returned. Duke Adrian Ravensheir understood that forgiveness could never be demanded. It could only be earned. He laid aside the privileges of rank without ceremony. Every morning before sunrise he joined the laborers repairing cottages beyond the castle walls. He carried heavy stones beside young apprentices, dug irrigation channels through stubborn earth, chopped timber until his hands blistered, and helped the blacksmith repair broken plows for neighboring farmers. When travelers thanked him by calling him Your Grace, he simply smiled and asked them to save their gratitude for the people who had welcomed strangers long before he had deserved welcome himself. At first the villagers watched him cautiously. They remembered the man whose decision had condemned Clara and the twins to unimaginable hardship. Yet they also saw him quietly repairing fences after storms, carrying firewood to elderly widows, teaching orphan boys how to read maps, sharpen tools safely, and settle disagreements without violence. He never excused his past or blamed deception alone. Whenever anyone mentioned Cedric's betrayal, Adrian answered with painful honesty. I chose to believe lies because they seemed easier than trusting the woman who had never given me reason to doubt her. Those words slowly changed hearts. One rainy afternoon the old blacksmith slipped while repairing the mill wheel and became trapped beneath a massive timber. Before anyone else reached him, Adrian threw himself into the rushing water, lifting the crushing beam high enough for others to pull the injured craftsman free. His shoulder was badly strained, yet he laughed away the pain when the blacksmith apologized for causing trouble. Clara watched the rescue from the riverbank, seeing not the feared commander celebrated across England but the humble man willing to suffer quietly so another family would remain whole. Days later she found him alone repairing the small bridge leading into the valley. You should let your shoulder heal, she said gently. He smiled without looking up. It heals faster when useful. She knelt beside him, opened a small pouch of herbs, and carefully spread a fragrant salve across the bruised muscles. Neither spoke for several moments. Birds sang from nearby branches while sunlight danced across the flowing stream. Finally Adrian whispered, "I cannot return what I took from you." Clara's hands paused. "No," she answered softly. "You cannot." The words hurt because they were true. "But every day you choose who you become next." She finished wrapping the bandage before quietly walking away. For Adrian, those few sentences carried more hope than any pardon from a king. Summer brought new life beyond anyone's expectations. Families continued arriving from every corner of England. Some had lost homes to fire. Others fled cruel landlords or disease. Veterans crippled by war appeared carrying little besides faded uniforms. Mothers arrived with hungry children. Elderly couples sought only warmth for their final years. None were turned away. Empty chambers became classrooms where children learned letters beside history and music. The abandoned chapel transformed into a clinic. Workshops filled with apprentices eager to master honest trades. Every newcomer discovered that the castle demanded no payment except willingness to help someone else when strength allowed. People gradually stopped calling it Ravensheir Castle. Instead they simply called it home. The name spread farther than anyone imagined. Travelers carried stories into bustling market towns. Merchants donated seeds and livestock after hearing how strangers had rebuilt a forgotten ruin through compassion rather than wealth. Even noble families quietly sent wagons filled with blankets, books, and tools after witnessing Adrian's remarkable transformation. The sanctuary became a living reminder that generosity inspired generosity far more powerfully than fear ever could. One crisp autumn morning, villagers gathered within the courtyard to celebrate the twins' first birthday. Long wooden tables overflowed with fresh bread, roasted vegetables, berry pies, and honey gathered from hives surrounding Clara's gardens. Children decorated every doorway with wildflowers while musicians played cheerful country dances beneath colorful ribbons stretching between towers once blackened by smoke. Oliver and Emma, now taking uncertain little steps, wandered delightedly through the celebration holding each other's tiny hands. Adrian knelt nearby, smiling with quiet anticipation. "I wonder which word he'll choose first," Elias said with amusement. Several villagers laughed. "Surely he'll say father." Others nodded confidently. Adrian's hopeful eyes never left his son. Oliver looked around the crowded courtyard, studying every familiar face. He saw the widow carrying warm bread, the blacksmith laughing beside the orphan brothers, Clara smiling beneath climbing roses, Elias feeding scraps to his loyal hunting dogs, and dozens of neighbors working together beneath bright autumn skies. The little boy clapped happily. Then he stretched both arms toward the bustling courtyard and spoke one clear word. "Home." Silence lasted only a heartbeat before tears and laughter swept through everyone gathered there. Adrian closed his eyes. He had commanded armies, inherited vast estates, won honors few men could imagine. Yet nothing had ever taught him a greater truth than the innocent voice of his son. Home was never built from marble halls, jeweled crowns, or ancient titles. Home was created wherever people chose love over pride, mercy over revenge, and service over power. As the seasons turned once more, the sanctuary continued growing until hundreds called it their own. Orphans found parents. Widows discovered friendship instead of loneliness. Travelers shared meals beside strangers who quickly became family. Every repaired stone carried a story of sacrifice. Every blooming garden reflected Clara's patient compassion. Every sturdy wall echoed Adrian's determination to become worthy of the life he had almost destroyed. Elias, growing older with each passing year, often watched children playing beneath the towers and smiled quietly, knowing that the greatest hunt of his life had never been against wolves or bears. It had been the rescue of hope itself. Years after the cruel winter that had begun their suffering, snow returned to the valley exactly as it had on the day Clara first crossed the lonely gates carrying newborn twins. This time, however, warm light glowed from every window. Laughter drifted through the crisp evening air. Smoke rose peacefully from countless chimneys. Adrian stood beside Clara with Oliver and Emma between them as a weary family approached through the falling snow, uncertain whether anyone would welcome them. Before the strangers could even knock, the twins hurried forward, took the frightened children's hands and led them inside. Adrian looked toward Clara, and without speaking she slipped her hand into his. Together they watched the gates remain open, exactly as they always would. The Duke who had once believed greatness came from commanding others finally understood that the richest inheritance he could leave the world was a place where no desperate soul would ever again be turned away, and in that enduring kindness, he and Clara found the home they had both been searching for all along.